better way to start a presentation about a data-driven on-call workflow than by sharing some actual data. Obviously, I couldn't find any better way, so for the next couple of seconds, I invite all of you to take a close look at this chart and try to guess what's being showcased here. Since we're talking about on-call, you might already have a hunch. It might be about downtime minutes, it might be about incident count per service, or even how many times my teams complain to me about on-call. Countless options, but let me shed some light because this is really important. What this chart showcases is the total number of on-call incident alerts an engineering team faces per day. A staggering number of 150 pages per day. I know, right? You can imagine that one on-call engineer part of that team barely has time to acknowledge the alerts, let alone fix them or even think about how to improve the overall process. Fortunately, this is not my team. And it does represent an extreme situation rather than the standard norm we encounter in our engineering teams. But unfortunately, this data is real and comes from an engineering manager I often share experiences with. Regardless, these numbers trigger me, and I bet you feel the same. To me, it raised the question, why do we still talk about painful on-call these days when so many companies all around the world strive for their employees' well-being and we have access to so many valuable resources? We are keen to provide our learnings and learn from each other. I mean, look at us out here. With time, I have found that on-call challenges tend to appear even in the most flourishing environments and among the most experienced engineers. And this is what brings me to this stage today. I spent the last 3 years figuring out what keeps engineering teams stuck with the bad on-call routine and how to craft a mindset that steers things around. The result? A data-driven on-call workflow inspired by atomic habits that I'm really happy to share with you today. But before we dive in, allow me to set the stage first. At Adobe, the company that I work for, we apply what we call unified engineering mindset. This means that each engineering team member is responsible from the very first line of code they write to how well it performs in production and ultimately how it meets our end user satisfaction. Each team member gets their turn during on-call, regardless their technical background or affinity. And while we follow the same common set of rules of engagement and responsibilities, each team at the end of the day has the flexibility to apply the process as they see fit. This you build it, you own it mindset has pushed us along the years to strive for applying the best operational practices that would enable us to operate at scale and solve complex problems while making our customers happy. Still, even within these teams, on-call challenges appear. And I know that drill pretty well. For 7 long years at Adobe, I've been in the front line, contributing and operating real-time services deployed all around the world with lots of nines of availability. And let me tell you, that excitement of being on call and making a difference for customers, well, it really wears off when a robot wakes you up in the middle of the night. So along the years, I've kind of made it my mantra to make sure that my team members and I get to spend the time enjoying the things we do best while experiencing an effective on-call workflow. But what does that even mean? Here's what it's not. It's a continuous cycle of services breaking down. alerts firing uncontrollably during off hours, and ultimately, a common sense of learned helplessness. To me, an effective on-call workflow is a data-driven and iterative process that allows time for reflection, learning, and continuous improvement. And if you have it, I bet it is fueled by a shared sense of empowerment and accountability in your team. How do you get to those sunny on-call days, after all? I have found my answer in Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. The main idea there is rather simple. As long as we understand why we do the things we do, we tend to do our best, and results follow along. And I found the same applies to on-call. First, whenever you're faced with on-call challenges, you have to take the time to really understand why is on-call that bad in the first place. Remember David yesterday. Notice and think. Stop for a bit. Then, identify what are the steps, the small ones, that you can implement right away that can help you steer things around. And at the end, reflect on the results that you get. And if they are not good enough, then start with why all over again until you find a way. And this is the exactly mental model, which is called the golden circle of why, that I'll use today with you as I'm going to walk you through how we managed to get to the sunny on-call days with an engineering team at Adobe. So allow me to introduce you the Edge team. This team as Adobe is responsible for serving digital marketing, crucial real-time capabilities for enterprise customers all around the world. And they do this at a global scale, serving 60 billion requests per day with 3 nines of availability. You can imagine that should a production issue occur, all eyes would be on us. On the bright side, though, being part of this team for each engineering team member means a lot of space and countless opportunities to learn and experiment while operating at such a huge scale. In fact, a lot of best operational practices that we apply today at Adobe have emerged from this team. And you can find these learnings on our Adobe Tech blog as well. On the outside, this team was flourishing and thriving. But once stepping inside, on-call was a hot topic, constant one that appeared in our one-on-ones, team dailies, retrospective, everything. Looking back at our on-call stats 3 years ago, we had a fair amount of 5 pages per day, with a 15 minutes mean time to resolve. Now I'm inclined to say that these numbers were really small compared to the complexity which we're operating at, and let alone the first chart that we've seen together today. However, there were 2 particular metrics that ultimately influenced the on-call vibe that we have. First, on a week, we used to have about 4 nights interrupted by on-call incident alerts. And the ultimate metric was what I called the mean time to fall asleep again. I cannot find this metric in any SRE book. It's definitely tricky to measure, but if you all read Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, then we can all agree that we shouldn't allow these things to happen in the first place, for our own mental and physical health. So that was the team, and there was I, acknowledging that we had a problem, and perfectly resonating with Gergely's tweet out here. People don't just leave managers. They leave shitty on-call rotations as well, and I believe they have all the right reasons to do so unless they are given the right space and time to fix them. So let's start with why. Why these things were happening in the first place. Remember COVID? 3 years ago, at about the same time our on-call discussion started to heat up, we were facing a pandemic that was hitting us all around the world. For us as a team, like all of you may know, this meant we completely switched to 100% remote work, and we were suddenly forced to find new ways of working together and ultimately collaborating together even during on-call. Interesting enough, this pandemic also changed our customer needs. A lot of enterprise customers all around the world switched from traditional marketing workflows to digital marketing solutions. And for us as a team, it meant that we were suddenly witnessing almost doubled real-time traffic, bringing along yet a new set of challenges that we had to deal in production. This business entropy also meant for us that we identify new product capabilities that we could provide this new set of customers, so we've gone through a rework. Suddenly, this Edge team became the sole owner of those worldwide services, and we needed to employ a 24/7 on-call rotation. Ultimately, this also meant for us that half of the team members were new, replacing the ones that were funding and seeding the new teams that we were setting up. And the icing on the cake, I was part of those new team members, as the new engineering manager of the team and also new to the role. You can imagine that there were a lot of changes to deal with within less than 3 months time frame. As time passed by and we started to form together as a team, on-call challenges still tended to appear. There was no actual sign of change or improvement. And I could link that to a series of bad habits, small ones, but that ultimately make the difference. First, we suffer from silent knowledge, and this particularly appeared during on-call. Regardless of who was doing primary on-call, back then, there was a heavy reliance on the team members that knew that specific part of the system inside out. And this occurred from both sides of the team. It was either the new team members that once they were facing an on-call alert, they would immediately ask for help instead of trying to troubleshoot the issue themselves. And it was also the subject matter expert team members that once they were seeing an alert, they would jump right away to solve it without actually involving the primary on-call engineer. Of course, in the short run, this allowed us to move with a really good pace, but in the end, on the long run, this only widened the knowledge gaps that we were suffering from. This behavior also was linked with the poor documentation issue that we were suffering from. The fact that we always relied on the same team members to solve those complex problems wasn't actually providing enough motivation and incentive in order to start and document those complex technical workflows, let alone technical prior decisions that we took. Ultimately, these team members became knowledge dependencies, and it only widened the challenge that we were suffering from. It was also interesting back then to take part in brainstorming discussions and technical brainstorming sessions. At that moment, whenever we started to ask ourselves why and what we can do actually to solve an on-call issue, all the roads led to ambitious plans like re-architecturing the whole system, migrating to a new set of technologies without really taking the time to really understand what was the root cause in that legacy code base, and maybe identify some small tweaks that it would make things better. Obviously, by also lacking a shared deep understanding of those systems inside the team, it was really hard to steer things around. And back then, it's also important to acknowledge the fact that most of our backlog items were driven primarily by our customers' needs. And it was even more challenging to showcase a complete system-wide change when we had no concrete evidence that it would provide a positive impact neither to us as engineering team or for our customers. Ultimately, these series of bad habits and the main focus on fixing the alerts first weren't providing enough space to actually question why do we have these alerts in the first place? I mean, what are our service level targets? Who had time for that? Now, by this point, you may find this obvious, and you might ask yourself, well, why were these things happening in the first place? I talked about experienced engineering team members, having experience with operating systems at scale. And in fact, they were suffering from this painful on-call routine. I have found science behind this. This is what psychologists call status quo bias. And it is about our human resistance to change, even though that change would actually be beneficial for us. No matter how bad are the things we experience, we always prefer to stick with what's familiar to us in face of the risk and the uncertainty that a change might bring. And I've kind of linked this status quo bias with what was happening in our team as well. Ultimately, after taking the time to notice and think and start with why, I realized that the on-call challenges that we were facing were beyond technical fixes. We were facing a social technical problem. And to steer things around, we had to touch each side of it. So how did I start? By identifying what good habits we needed to adopt in order to replace the bad ones and actually going to get those sunny on-call days. And when it comes to habits, there's no better book out there than Atomic Habits. According to James Clear, if you want to turn a specific set of actions, and basically consciously set of actions that you do, to an unconscious state, meaning a habit, you have to follow these simple 4 rules. First, you have to make it obvious. Everywhere you go, you need to receive cues that, hey, you need to take this action. Now, here. In order to be able to take that first step of an action, you have to make it attractive. After all, you have to get something out of it. To be able to make the next step, you have to make it easy, because each change requires a new level of effort that you need to put in, and change is already hard. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to get your sense of progress, the accomplishments, the rewards for putting the effort in the first place. And I follow the same simple 4 laws of behavior change from Atomic Books with my team. First, to make it obvious, I started to collect everything about on-call incident data. Alerts, service details, root cause analysis, when did it occur. And finally, I was able, together with my team, to gather together and explore meaningful charts that would showcase really clear what kind of incidents were actually providing us these on-call pains, which services were actually the ones that we needed to invest in more, and how many alerts were actually actionable versus the ones that were auto-resolved within minutes, or even the ones that we used to snooze, because we already knew that at some point they would get to resolve. By engaging in these regular data analysis exercises, our prior passionate yet ineffective discussions turn out to be more pragmatic and actionable ones, and helped us at the end of each brainstorming discussions to really identify those action items that we could take straight away in order to improve our on-call experience. To make it attractive, we started to collect these on-call action items into a designated on-call backlog. As Nicole Force-Green says in the Accelerate book, work is work, no matter whether it's a feature-related task or an on-call action item, and this is exactly what we did. Ultimately, the team was responsible for prioritizing this backlog. No one else did, because we had the data, and we knew best what we needed in order to improve the overall on-call experience. And to make it even more attractive, we paired two existing habits during our on-call routine. We already had the existing habit of being primary on-call for 1 week, and we paired it with a new one, which we called the on-duty role. This meant that each week, everyone who turned in their on-call rotation, they get to spend their silent times working on the on-call action items that we were prioritizing together and being empowered to delegate all the other related tasks to the team. So by engaging in this new on-duty role and habit, we had continuous time to think, reflect, and take action on those ideas that we were extracting from our on-call data. To make it easy, we also started to do more strategic sessions of on-call reviews. This meant that at the end of each on-call rotation, the prior primary on-call engineer would come prepared to discuss the latest on-call trends, to review together with the team what were the results of the prior action items that we took together, and ultimately decide what we can do next in the couple of hours to bring those line downs further. Soon enough, by engaging in these repetitive exercises, it became satisfying. In these on-call reviews, we started to see the data that was showing we were making progress. Here in this chart, you can notice a clear decrease in the number of incidents the service blue was causing. For us, this wasn't just data. It was a clear and tangible results of all the action items we took together based on data in order to improve our overall on-call experience. Reflecting on our journey back there, I think the game changer was the fact that we managed to switch from an emotional, gut-driven on-call discussions to a space where we could actually become pragmatic and focus on the goals that really helped us steer things around from the very same day. However, it is important to acknowledge that change is gradual and definitely met with resistance. Status quo bias applies here as well. And what I've showcased today is the result of multiple experiments and iterations we've gone through together as a team. And while you try to apply it to a different team, you still have to go back and start with why. Because even though the simple rules of the mental model are useful, each team has its own peculiarities, and you need to adapt it as you go along the way. But persistence is an ally here, and I think that by following the golden circle of why, and helping you with the right data, you'll become successful at the end of the day. In the end, I want to leave you with the food for thought coming from John Cutler. You can only build positive habits when your team has the bandwidth. And those leaders who usually make progress are the ones that manage to influence both their teams and their organization to slow down in order to speed up later. You cannot build a better on-call routine where everything seems to be important and urgent. And the bad news is that for me, the feeling appears every single day. So that's why I believe that as engineering leaders, we are responsible for identifying the right balance that works for our team and our organization. If you have found yourself in a similar situation, or you know someone who does, then I'm also leaving you a set of Python scripts that have enabled us along the way to start to collect incident data and then build valuable charts that would help you get started with these conversations and identify the why of your team. Thank you for having me today. I'm in awe of this great global community that I have the privilege to look here, and I'm keen to connect with you further on the very same topic during the first office hours. Thank you.